When Richard Posner leaned forward and asked, "What exactly makes you qualified, Congresswoman?" the room froze. Cameras clicked, lights glared, and the air thickened with that peculiar silence that only follows arrogance disguised as inquiry. For a split second, it felt like the old world had spoken, the kind that measured worth in pedigree, not persistence, in titles, not truth. Across the table, Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. Her fingers rested lightly on the stack of case files before her, calm as a chess player already 3 moves ahead. Around them, the hearing room buzzed with barely contained electricity. Journalists exchanged quick glances, sensing the kind of headline that writes itself. Aides' phones vibrated, Twitter feeds flickered alive. Number Crockett versus Posner had just been born. Posner's expression carried the weight of decades on the bench. Confident, precise, almost indulgent. He leaned back, satisfied that his question would echo as an indictment. But for those watching, the interns in the hallway, the young lawyers perched on office sofas, the students live streaming from dorm rooms, it wasn't just a question. It was a test, a challenge from the old guard to the new conscience of America. Crockett met his gaze. There was no defensiveness in her posture, no rush to fill the silence. She let it stretch, a quiet rebellion against the demand to perform. Her voice, when it came, was measured and warm, carrying the steady rhythm of someone who's argued for people who never had a seat at this table. But she didn't answer. Not yet. In the crowd, someone whispered, "She's not gonna let that slide." Another muttered, "He doesn't know who he's talking to." And somewhere, in a dimly lit newsroom, a producer mouthed the words every editor loves to hear. "We've got a moment." This wasn't just about credentials anymore. It was about who gets to define merit, who gets to be believed, respected, and heard. The question wasn't whether Jasmine Crockett had earned her place. The real question was whether America was ready to confront what her presence meant. And as the seconds ticked, one truth became undeniable. What came next would silence even the harshest critics, including Posner himself. To understand what unfolded in that room, you have to step back, beyond the blinding camera flashes and polite applause, into the deeper currents that made this confrontation inevitable. This wasn't just a tense exchange between two legal minds, it was a generational collision, decades in the making. On one side stood Richard Posner, the embodiment of judicial intellect, a man who had shaped American thought with cold precision. On the other stood Jasmine Crockett, young, unapologetically black, and fiercely unbothered by the old language of power. Posner represented the America that worshipped credentials. Law reviews, citations, clerks from Harvard and Yale, these were his soldiers, his measures of worth. He spoke the language of logic, of reason untethered from empathy. To him, justice was an equation. To her, it was a heartbeat. Crockett came from a world that Posner's footnotes rarely mentioned, where justice wasn't a theory but survival, where law wasn't written for you but used against you. That contrast was the powder keg beneath the hearing table. For months, the tension had been building. Their paths had crossed indirectly through interviews, televised panels, and quotes clipped and shared across platforms. Posner, the intellectual heavyweight, had once remarked that emotion clouds the law. Crockett, in a viral reply, shot back, "Maybe that's why too many people can't see the humanity behind it." The internet had chosen sides immediately. Now, with both figures in the same room, it felt like a reckoning. The hearing wasn't just about policy. It was about pride, presence, and the power to redefine what authority looks like. As Posner prepared to question her, pundits were already circling. Commentators framed it as an intellectual mismatch. Hashtags trended with smug certainty. Hashtag Posner will school her. Even sympathetic outlets warned Crockett to stay composed, stay polite. But she didn't walk in seeking permission. She walked in carrying every courtroom victory that went untelevised, every client who cried when justice finally leaned their way. And though the cameras only saw a woman in a blue suit with a calm expression, what they couldn't see was the weight of generations behind that stillness. She didn't rise to the bait, she didn't break eye contact. In that pause, that quiet defiance, the whole story of her life gathered itself behind her. The journey from South Dallas to Congress, from doubted to undeniable, from outsider to symbol. And when the cameras zoomed in, viewers didn't just see a politician preparing to answer a question. They saw a generation staring back at its gatekeepers, unshaken. Because for Jasmine Crockett, this wasn't about proving she belonged in that room. It was about reminding America who built the rooms in the first place. And as the tension thickened and her lips parted to finally respond, the audience didn't breathe. They knew something seismic was about to happen. She didn't flinch. The question hung in the air like smoke. "What exactly makes you qualified, Congresswoman?" The words sounded polite, but everyone in the room could feel the sting beneath the surface. It wasn't curiosity, it was challenge, layered in condescension. Richard Posner's tone carried that you don't practice civility of men who've spent decades being obeyed. He wasn't asking to learn. He was asking to remind. Jasmine Crockett leaned slightly forward, her hands still folded. The silence that followed wasn't hesitation. It was strategy. Around her, aides shifted nervously, unsure whether to intervene or let the tension breathe. Cameras zoomed closer. The faint click of shutters marked the seconds. Across the country, people tuned in, the live stream numbers climbing by the minute. Posner continued, filling the silence with the sound of his own certainty. "I've read your record," he said, his voice precise. "Some courtroom work, some local activism. Admirable, perhaps, but when we talk about legal sophistication, jurisprudential rigor, surely you understand why experience matters." That word, matters, hit like a flicked glove. Crockett's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, deliberate, every syllable carrying purpose. "I understand experience, Judge," she said. "I just don't confuse it with empathy." A low murmur rippled through the chamber. Reporters looked up from their screens. Posner blinked, not offended, just surprised that his rhythm had been interrupted. "Empathy," he repeated, almost amused. "That's a lovely sentiment, Congresswoman, but the law doesn't run on sentiment. It runs on reason." Crockett tilted her head slightly. "And yet," she said softly, "reason without humanity tends to serve whoever already has power." It was like watching two worlds speak past each other, one fluent in precedent, the other fluent in pain. The tension in the room thickened into theater. Each sentence felt like a move on an invisible chessboard. Posner straightened his papers. "That may sound compelling," he replied, "but your record, if we're being honest, reflects more emotion than evidence." "Maybe," Crockett said, eyes locked on him, "or maybe evidence looks different when you're the one people stop listening to." The audience gasped, not loud, but collective. On social media, the first clips appeared within seconds. Crockett checks Posner with precision. Threads exploded, screenshots circulated, the hashtag began trending again. But inside that hearing room, no one moved. Posner's composure was firm, yet the faintest tension showed in his jaw. He leaned closer, voice dipping into steel. "Are you suggesting, Congresswoman, that intellect itself is biased?" Crockett didn't blink. "I'm suggesting," she said, "that intellect divorced from compassion isn't intellect. It's ego." For a moment, the only sound was the hum of fluorescent lights. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. The clash wasn't loud, but it was seismic. A collision between eras, generations, moral codes. Posner's face held steady, but his silence said everything. He regrouped, clearing his throat. "That's quite the accusation," he said. "But I assure you, my career speaks for itself." "It does," Crockett replied gently. "And so do the people who never had the luxury of one." A reporter's pen dropped onto the desk. Somewhere near the back, someone whispered, "She's not debating. She's teaching." By now, the live stream had exploded. Thousands of comments streamed in real time. "She's holding her ground. He's losing control. This is history." Posner adjusted his glasses, searching for footing, but before he could speak again, Crockett's gaze softened. Not in concession, but in calm dominance. "I didn't come here to argue experience," she said. "I came here to remind us what it's for." He froze. It wasn't defiance that disarmed him, it was sincerity. And in that stillness, something shifted. The old authority in his voice began to sound defensive. The audience could feel it, the reversal. Then, Crockett leaned in, her tone almost compassionate. "Judge, you once said justice should never weep. Maybe it should, just once, so it remembers who it serves." The silence that followed was breathtaking. Even Posner didn't interrupt. And then, with one sentence, she flipped the entire argument. For a heartbeat, the room didn't move. Richard Posner's expression was unreadable, a mix of poise and discomfort, intellect colliding with emotion in real time. The cameras caught everything, the faint twitch in his brow, the tightening of his jaw. He'd questioned hundreds of witnesses, grilled legal minds tougher than steel. But this was different. Jasmine Crockett sat back slightly, letting the silence stretch until it became its own kind of indictment. Then she spoke. "You asked what makes me qualified?" she said, her voice steady but carrying the unmistakable force of someone who'd fought her way through every locked door in sight. Let me answer that. Not with titles or degrees, but with what they never print on resumes. A hush rolled through the audience. Every head turned toward her. Even Posner, seasoned master of courtroom decorum, leaned in without meaning to. I'm qualified, Crockett continued, because when a single mother in South Dallas was evicted with nowhere to go, I showed up at midnight with an injunction that bought her a week to breathe. I'm qualified because I stood beside a teenager accused of a crime he didn't commit, and when no one believed his story, I found the footage that cleared his name. I'm qualified because I know what it's like to walk into a courtroom and watch eyes roll before I've said a single word, and still win anyway. Each line landed like a drumbeat. Journalists typed furiously. The click-clack of keyboards became the soundtrack to history. Posner tried to interject, a soft "Congresswoman" forming on his lips, but Crockett didn't pause. Her tone sharpened, rising like a slow crescendo. I didn't inherit a legacy of power. I built one. Case by case, client by client, hour by hour. I've stood on courthouse steps where people told me justice wasn't meant for folks like us, and I didn't argue with them. I proved them wrong. Gasps rippled across the room. Someone whispered, "She's not debating anymore. She's delivering testimony." Crockett leaned forward. You talk about merit, Judge Posner. Let's talk about that word. Merit defined by who? Measured against whose yardstick? The kind that counts only what's on paper, or the kind that measures how many lives you've changed? The tension in the air thickened. Electric. Posner adjusted his glasses. A reflex, a flicker of unease breaking through his stoicism. Crockett continued, voice unwavering. Because where I come from, merit isn't framed in mahogany or embossed in Latin. It's the grandmother who works 2 jobs and still finds time to vote. It's the public defender who spends her nights writing appeals for people the system forgot. It's every young black woman told she's too loud, too emotional, too ambitious, and shows up anyway. By now, even the cameramen were standing straighter, instinctively sensing the weight of the moment. The hashtag # Crockett vs. Posner exploded again online, comment sections flooding with disbelief and admiration. Posner sat still, the rhythm of his breathing, shallow but visible. He looked less like the interrogator now and more like someone seeing a mirror for the first time. Crockett took a breath, her voice softening. Judge, I've read your books, she said. Your logic is clean, your analysis sharp, but sometimes when you strip humanity out of justice, what's left is cruelty dressed up as order. You built an empire on reason. I respect that, but I built mine on people. And people, she paused, don't fit neatly into footnotes. A few audience members clapped. Hesitant at first, then louder. Posner held up a hand, but the applause didn't stop. When it finally settled, Crockett spoke again, quieter this time. Credentials? She repeated. My credentials are the mothers who call me after a verdict and say, thank you for believing me. My credentials are the kids who still have a future because someone fought when it wasn't convenient. My credentials are the people I defended when no one else would. The words hit like thunder. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Truth has its own volume. Posner's eyes flickered. A flash of something, not anger, not defiance, but recognition. For the first time, his famed composure faltered. Crockett didn't gloat. Instead, she looked at him with the quiet grace of someone who's learned that victory doesn't always require vengeance. You asked what makes me qualified, she said again, slower now, her voice almost tender. It's not the letters after my name. It's the scars I earned before I got them. Then came the silence, full, resonant, absolute. It wasn't the silence of defeat, it was the silence of realization. Even the reporters stopped typing. Posner leaned back in his chair. His expression softened, eyes distant, the look of a man processing the one thing no courtroom had ever demanded from him. Humility. Crockett didn't move. She let the moment linger, unforced, unhurried. The camera caught it. The frozen image that would flood the internet. Posner speechless, Crockett composed, sunlight cutting through the blinds like divine punctuation. Somewhere in the back, a young intern whispered, "This is what power looks like when it remembers its purpose." Crockett finally broke the stillness with a quiet smile. Justice, she said, isn't about who speaks the loudest. It's about who listens longest. And with that, she gathered her notes, No flourish, no dramatics, just calm finality. The audience erupted, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing like fireworks. But Posner didn't speak. For the first time in decades, the judge who always had an answer had none. Across social media, clips multiplied by the minute. Hashtags trended in over 30 countries. Commentators replayed the moment again and again. The pause, the silence, the look. For once, even Richard Posner had no words. And in that instant, history didn't feel like something written in books. It felt alive, pulsing, undeniable, echoing through every voice that had ever been told it didn't belong. The moment the clip hit the internet, it was like striking a match in a room full of gasoline. Within minutes, hashtag Speechless Posner was trending in the US, then the UK, and within the hour, across every continent where Wi-Fi could carry a signal. The video had everything the algorithm worshipped: confrontation, grace under pressure, poetic justice. The caption beneath most reposts said it best. She didn't argue. She educated within. The first 24 hours, the exchange racked up millions of views. TikToks appeared with dramatic slow motion of Posner's stunned expression synced to orchestral music. On X, users quoted Crockett's line, "My credentials are the people I defended when no one else would." Like scripture, it was more than a viral moment, it was cultural vindication. Influencers who'd never cared about congressional hearings before were suddenly experts on judicial decorum. One clip from a progressive commentator went viral overnight. "This isn't just about a debate. This is about what happens when empathy outsmarts ego." Her video hit 10 million views by sunrise. Late-night hosts joined in too, weaving Crockett's triumph into punchlines that doubled as applause lines. Richard Posner wrote the book on logic, one joked, and Jasmine Crockett just annotated it. The audience roared. Even traditional media, cautious as ever, couldn't resist. CNN replayed the moment with slow zooms, calling it a generational exchange, intellect meeting lived experience. The New York Times ran a column titled "The Sound of Silence: When Power Meets Its Match." But beneath the noise was something deeper, something emotional. For many viewers, especially women of color, this wasn't just entertainment. It was a mirror. They saw themselves in her composure, her precision, her refusal to shrink. Hashtags like hashtag Crockett taught us and hashtag justice. As a pulse began to surface, college campuses buzzed with debate. Law students dissected the transcript like sacred text. Professors quoting her lines in lectures about rhetoric and power dynamics. One student tweeted, "For the first time in law school, I felt like the person behind the podium looked like me and won." The ripple effect reached beyond academia. Community organizers used her words in speeches about representation. Teachers printed them on bulletin boards. Even some of Posner's former clerks admitted privately that they'd never seen him look so human, so shaken awake. Meanwhile, the man himself kept quiet. No statements, no interviews, just silence, which only amplified the myth. The image of him sitting there, chin tilted slightly down, eyes averted, it became iconic. It symbolized something few moments in public life ever achieve: a turning of the tide. Still, not everyone celebrated. Conservative pundits dismissed it as theatrics, accusing Crockett of emotional manipulation, masquerading as intellect. But their outrage only fueled the fire. Every time they clipped her words out of context, supporters re-uploaded the full version with the caption, "Watch the whole thing. The truth speaks for itself." Within a week, universities hosted panels titled "The Crockett Moment: Emotion, Merit, and Modern Justice." Crowds overflowed auditoriums. Her staff stopped counting interview requests after the first 100. It wasn't just political fame, it was cultural resonance. And yet, through all the virality and commentary, Crockett herself remained measured. When asked about the confrontation in an interview, she simply said, "It wasn't about winning. It was about being heard." Those 7 words reignited another wave of admiration. Memes called her the calm before the storm. A mural appeared overnight on a brick wall in Houston. Crockett's face in grayscale, beneath it the words "Dignity doesn't shout." Meanwhile, Posner's absence from the public conversation only deepened the mystique. A former colleague told reporters, "He's processing it. You don't get shaken like that unless something true hit you." The story wasn't just living, it was evolving. Commentators began discussing what the moment meant for America's understanding of intelligence itself. Could intellect exist without empathy? Could expertise survive without accountability? And somewhere between the think pieces and the TikToks, people began to feel something rare. Hope. Hope that grace could still triumph over arrogance. That truth, when spoken calmly and courageously, could still move the immovable. By the end of the week, an op-ed headline summed it up. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the bar. But for all the praise and poetry, the real impact was quieter. In classrooms, in living rooms, in the eyes of young viewers who now saw power differently. Because what Jasmine Crockett had done wasn't just silence a man. She'd shifted a narrative. And as the nation replayed her words, line by line, something was already stirring beyond the viral noise. A conversation bigger than her or Posner. Because her words didn't just win the room. They reignited a movement. When the headlines faded and the algorithms found new obsessions, something far more enduring remained. A quiet reckoning. Across dinner tables, classrooms, and community halls, people were still quoting Jasmine Crockett's words. Not the viral lines, not the ones clipped for applause, but the heart of it. My credentials are the people I defended when no one else would. That sentence had become a kind of secular prayer, a compass pointing toward what dignity sounds like when it finds its voice. In her next public appearance, Crockett didn't talk about Posner. She didn't have to. Instead, she began her speech with a smile that disarmed the room. "It's never about titles," she said. "It's about truth." The crowd went silent, not in awe, but in recognition. They knew she was speaking to something larger than politics. She was reframing an old American myth, the idea that brilliance belongs to the few, that justice wears a robe, that intellect needs permission to be heard. She paused, letting the words breathe. Because if your intelligence only matters when someone else approves it, she continued, then it was never intelligence. It was validation. The line rippled through the audience like a low thunder. You could feel people leaning in, not as spectators, but as witnesses. What they were hearing wasn't just inspiration, it was permission. Permission to take up space, permission to belong, permission to stop apologizing for being the smartest person in the room. For years, voices like Crockett's had been told to wait their turn, to prove their worth twice over, to soften their edges so that power could feel comfortable. But that day, she flipped the hierarchy. She showed that intellect didn't need to sound cold, that conviction could coexist with compassion, and that clarity, when rooted in truth, could humble even the most exalted. In that moment, merit stopped being a gate and became a bridge. The message spread beyond politics, into classrooms, boardrooms, and kitchen table debates. Teachers used her story to explain courage. Parents shared it with their daughters as proof that composure beats condescension. Even critics, though reluctant, admitted that she had forced a necessary conversation about what qualified really means. And through it all, Crockett stayed grounded. In an interview, weeks later, when a reporter asked if she felt vindicated, she smiled and said, "Vindication isn't the goal. Understanding is." It wasn't a mic drop this time. It was a truth whispered loud enough to echo. She went on, "We've built a culture that measures genius in test scores and degrees, but overlooks wisdom born from struggle. We forget that intellect isn't just what you know. It's what you do with what you know." Her voice softened, but her words hit harder than any confrontation. Because justice, she said, isn't a concept you memorize. It's a choice you make every day, especially when no one's watching. That line, simple, unembellished, became the quiet moral spine of her legacy. Across social media, the noise finally slowed into reflection. Videos of her courtroom days resurfaced. Grainy footage of a young attorney, sleeves rolled up, defending clients who couldn't afford hope. Each clip told the same story. Conviction without arrogance, intellect without cruelty. It was as if America, for a brief moment, remembered that greatness doesn't always wear prestige. Sometimes it wears exhaustion and grace. Commentators began to describe that hearing not as a battle, but as a mirror. On one side, the old faith in credentials and control. On the other, a new vision of justice, lived, breathed, and human. And as the final frame of that viral video replayed, Crockett poised in stillness, Posner caught in silence, the meaning had evolved. It was no longer about who won an argument. It was about what kind of truth endures after the applause fades. In a world obsessed with resumes, she had reminded everyone that conviction is its own credential. And somewhere in that truth, America found a little more of its soul. Long after the cameras stopped rolling, the echo of that moment refused to fade. It lived in the pauses between debates, in the quiet confidence of those who'd once been dismissed. Because Richard Posner's silence wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. For the first time, the old world of pedigree and privilege had been forced to listen, really listen to the new voice of America. And that voice, calm, unflinching, grounded in lived truth, belonged to Jasmine Crockett. Her composure became a lesson, her words a rallying cry. It's not about titles, it's about truth. That line now stood like a banner for every student, worker, and dreamer who had ever been told they didn't belong in the conversation. As the video continued to circulate, it stopped being just content, it became conviction. People didn't share it because it was viral. They shared it because it meant something, because it reminded them that intellect isn't confined to ivory towers and respect doesn't require permission. So if you're watching this, ask yourself, who decides what qualified looks like? Whose definition of genius are you still trying to meet? Because the truth is simple, intellect belongs to everyone. Power belongs to those who use it for others. And dignity, that quiet, unstoppable force, belongs to anyone brave enough to hold their ground when the world tells them to bow. So share this story, not just for the views, but for the values. Share it for every voice that's been underestimated, every truth that's been talked over, every dream that's been told to wait. Because sometimes the smartest voice in the room is the one that refuses to shout.